So how do we manage the ethical challenges of research? This isn't a question just for us as people who are studying sexual assault, although there are some particular things that are important when thinking about the ethical challenges of sexual assault. All social science researchers have to deal with ethical questions of what it means to make sure that you don't harm your research subjects, that the people you're studying you treat with it in an ethical way. And so, some of the principles that we take when we do this kind of research is we say we can't harm our subjects. And that means being attentive to the dangers that they might experience in being part of our research. For research on sexual assault, this means thinking about the reputational damage they might experience if their friends or family members read about what they experienced or what they did. But it also means thinking about how it is that you could potentially harm people in the ways in which you're doing that research. So in participating in telling their stories, what are the harms that they might experience? And how do we reckon with our obligation to the individuals and the communities that we're researching?
So when we developed the proposal for the Institutional Review Board, because there's a whole federal system in place to review human subjects research so that it's not individual investigators making choices about whether or not their research is going to harm people, but rather there's a regulatory system that exists to protect people. One of the questions that the IRB had for us is, what are you going to do when or if the people that you interview become very distressed? So not just what if your interview is hard for them to talk about, but what if it actually causes harm? And so Claudette Mellons, who had done just a whole long history of doing research on vulnerable adolescent populations, helped us adapt the emergency protocol that she had used so that our whole interview team was trained and there was a clinician on call so that if someone became very distressed in the course of the interview, we could call the clinician and figure out if they had to be immediately triaged to some sort of supportive care. Now, it turned out actually that doing the research was so hard on the team that most of the times that we called in a clinician for emergency support, it was because one of the interviewers was very distraught. We did provide everyone that we interviewed with a list of resources so that they never went away not knowing where they could turn if they needed to. Another thing that's relevant in terms of the whole panorama of human subjects protection in this research is how it was that we got an exemption from mandated reporting. Because remember, the whole point of mandated reporting is to make sure that institutions don't sweep incidents of sexual assault under the rug, that it's to prevent cover-ups from happening. And so understandably, there was some concern about allowing anybody to be exempt from a system that's designed to prevent things from being hushed up. And so we worked actually with the Office of the General Counsel at Columbia, and they did a risk analysis, and we sort of developed together language around how the research that we were doing was in the spirit of Title IX. So really the requirement of mandated reporting is to make sure that sexual assault is recognized and addressed. And because we were actually going to recognize and address dimensions of sexual assault that the university would otherwise never learn about, it was judged that our research merited an exemption from that requirement because it was in the spirit of Title IX. Another important thing to know in terms of the research ethics, and this is the thing that people misunderstand the most about our research, is that we weren't spying on people. Ethnography is not spying. They always had a choice of whether to participate. And in fact, I have this kind of dorky acronym that I've used since the beginning, since my dissertation research, to explain how to manage consent when you're in a situation of participant observation. It's TACT, T-A-C-T. So T stands for topic, what the study is about. A stands for anonymity. So what you're going to do as a researcher to protect the anonymity of the people in the research. C stands for contact. So who is the principal investigator, and what you'll do to let people know who they should complain to if they have a complaint about the research. And then T, the final T, stands for to be in the study is your choice. And so we use that acronym TACT to train our ethnographic team in the 4 things that they had to tell people when they were out and about on campus life. So people obviously, like, they can walk away from you when they're at a party. And when you're at a party, clearly you can't get the names of everybody in the room, but also you don't need the names of everybody in the room because you're not writing about them as individuals. You're writing about how people behave in general at a party. We were scrupulously attentive to people's rights as participants in the research. And actually we told people when we interviewed them that if they changed their minds later, they could withdraw from the study. And so there was one person who did an interview with one of the members of the ethno team, and then later changed their mind. And so they reached out, and so we destroyed their data because that people have a right to not have their data be in your research.
So, in addition to protecting people over the course of research, which meant, making sure that we told them that they were participating through a process of informed consent, they knew what we were doing, and they consented to participate, and having emergency protocols, we also did things to protect people over the course of our writing. So, in Sexual Citizens, when you learn somebody's name, it is not their actual name. When you learn where somebody is from, it's usually not where they're from. It could be, but it's probably not. If we tell you that somebody is a sophomore, they may be a junior. There are lots of details that we change throughout the book that we think of as not particularly important, that help hide the identity of people so that when they're reading the book, or that when their friends are reading the book, they wouldn't be able to identify them. Now, we don't change things so dramatically that the people would be, that it would have an effect on the analysis. So we would never make, for example, a freshman a senior, because there's really something meaningful about being a freshman on campus that's quite different than being a senior. And so people may interpret the stories incorrectly if we say that somebody who is actually a freshman is a senior. But other details that we can change, people's hair color, or whether or not you're from Connecticut, we might make you from Rhode Island or Massachusetts or Maine, something like that. Those things we do change along the way in order to protect the identities of the people that we were studying. As Jennifer said before, our team experienced a lot of challenges over the course of this research. And, to be honest, it was kind of surprising, because I think when we were first designing the project, we thought, the big challenge is going to be the mental health struggles and the challenges of the people who are being interviewed. But actually, a lot of the people who were being interviewed walked away from the interview saying, like, wow, it was great to finally talk to someone about these experiences I've had. And the person who was doing the interview was left there carrying all of this weight of that experience. And so Jennifer and I designed a process of research where we checked in at the beginning of every single meeting about the mental health of our team members. And we were kind of there for one another. And this is part of doing research is, Jennifer and I are social scientists, and we think about ourselves as rigorous social scientists, but we're also human beings. And the research process is a human process where you have to be there for one another, and you have to be there for the people who are working for you. And so this was really essential to the project in terms of the methods and the ethics, not just our ethical commitments to the subjects, but to one another. Now, you may wonder, like, why didn't we report the assaults that we heard about? And what did we do in instances where we saw illegal activity? So there are stories in the book about people doing cocaine, and clearly we didn't call the police. And people told us stories about being assaulted, and sometimes they used names of the people who assaulted them. Why didn't we report that? Isn't that our ethical obligation? Well, the approach that we took for research here has to do with sort of, there are certain things that people are never going to tell you if you're going to report it. Remember just for a moment that about 5%, fewer than 5% of the assaults that occur on college campuses are ever reported. That means the vast majority of what's happening we never see. And people have good reasons for not wanting to report. So if we reported on people about the experiences that they had, we would miss a huge portion of what was happening on campus. And so while you might think, like, when you hear about an assault, you should do something about it, we think we are doing something about it. We're not doing something about that particular assault or the experience that the person had and reporting on that. But we are creating knowledge and understanding about why that person had that experience, and hopefully we'll be able to transform institutions in light of that knowledge. So from the perspective of a scientist, of a research scientist, the idea is we want to get as much information that we can in order to generate understanding. And if we reported on every incident that we heard, then we wouldn't be able to hear about most instances, and we wouldn't be able to generate good scientific knowledge. And so we take this kind of long or broader view that those insights are going to be really important to us. Now, that we did in our emergency protocol have instances where we would have intervened. So just because we didn't report on the assaults that we heard doesn't mean that we wouldn't intervene if somebody was in harm's way. And we actually had really clear guidelines for when we were making observations that if we saw something that we felt we should be intervening in because someone was at risk, we would intervene. Also, if someone was likely to be at harm to themselves, we would have intervened. So if we thought this person is likely to harm themselves, and we had been trained by Claudine Mellons, as Jennifer said, a psychologist, to evaluate that. Similarly, if we thought that someone was going to harm somebody else, we would have intervened. So there were conditions where we would intervene, but we wouldn't report every single instance, because to us, our aim was to gather rigorous scientific knowledge and then to use that knowledge to hopefully transform not only our campus context, but other campus contexts to increase the safety and the kinds of experiences that college students are having today and into the future.